Welcome, 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 welcome. Blacks in Cinema Sunday. We are back. Floyd House Flicks in the building. Blacks in Cinema Sunday. What a great choice today. A Raisin in the Sun, 1961. What is it? It premiered May 11th. I think it was March 11th, 1959 is when it was actually a play, a Broadway play, before it was adapted into a film, and the film came out in May of 1961. Before I go any further, let me say thank you for joining me in Blacks in Cinema Sunday. I know it's been at least 2 weeks since we've had a Blacks in Cinema Sunday, but here we are, Blacks in Cinema Sunday. Floyd House Flicks in the building. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Blacks in Cinema Sunday is where we focus and have conversations about film featuring black actors. Today's film again is A Raisin in the Sun. This is the 1961 version of A Raisin in the Sun, starring Sidney Poitier, Ruby Dee, Claudia McNeil, Diana Sands, Lou Gossett Jr., a very young Ivan Dixon. It was a great film. It was so many wonderful monologues in this film. The screenplay was written by Lorraine Hansberry. If you don't know, go look. But this film was very well done, very, very well done. It speaks to a lot of issues in proud households, and I speak directly to proud black households. It just so happens in this scenario, the father, the patriarch of the family, hardworking man, just took care of his family for years. He passed away, and he had a life insurance policy, and the life insurance policy was for $10,000. Now, $10,000 back I guess in this case would have been the 50s. $10,000 goes a long way. When the money was being set up to come in, the son, Walter, had these ambitions of opening up a liquor store, thinking he could take care of his family with the revenue from this idea to own this liquor store. Walter, of course, played by Sidney Poitier. His wife, Ruth, played by Ruby Dee, was very much a homemaker, good mother, good wife. She did everything she could do to encourage her husband to just stay the path. And then there was the sister, played by Diana Sands. Her name was Beneatha Younger. She wanted to be a doctor. She was a student and she wanted to be a doctor, and she was very ambitious about being a doctor in America. She wanted to help people. That was her lot in life, so to speak. Um, the story was interesting in the sense that you got to see the dynamics of a family newly lost of their patriarch, and how the redevelopment of the family was going to happen, because the man of the house now has to take responsibility and control of everything. And when you're not of the mind, not of the mind, I won't say not of the mind, when you don't feel confident and you have to take control, it's very daunting. So you tend to think a little wildly, and it's just one of those things. Just speaking as a person that was a young black man who had to do these things. So perspective is 75% of the conversation, if you will. So let me read the plot of the movie. Members of the Younger family are anticipating a life insurance check in the amount of $10,000, and each of them has an idea of what he or she would like to do with the money. Matriarch Lena Younger And Lena Younger, I'm sorry I didn't mention Lena Younger. Lena Younger was played by Claudia McNeil. Matriarch of the family, Lena Younger wants to buy a house to fulfill the dream she shared with her deceased husband. Walter Lee, played by Sidney Poitier, her son, would rather use the money to invest in a liquor store, believing the income would put an end to the family's financial woes. Ruth, Walter, played by Ruby Dee, Walter's wife, wanted to provide more space and a better opportunity for her son, Travis, and agrees with Lena. Benitha, Lena's younger daughter, would like to use the money to pay for her medical school tuition. Everybody has their own ideas of how to spend this money, but it creates conflict within the household. But they kind of work their way through it, and it was the mother's money. It was Mrs. Younger's money to take care of her family. Lena spent $3,500 on a down payment for a house in Clybourne Park. I don't know what city that is. Clybourne Park. And after being agitated many times by Walter, gives him the remaining $6,500 and tells him to save $3,000 for Benitha's schooling and $3,500 for himself and his plan to open up this liquor store. Walter sort of hit the skids. Now, I won't say hit the skids, that's not fair. Walter sort of fell into a funk because he wanted all of the money to be able to do what he wanted to do in his head, what he thought was going to help his family. Whether it was going to work or not going to work, his ambition and his mind was set in one direction. Sometimes that's not always the best way. Sometimes people who know more than you might overthink you, and then you feel some kind of way. Walter had a way of always feeling some kind of way, always feeling like there was some sort of slight issue to him. He was a bit of what we call a slight collector. Every time something happened, he was made to feel like he was being treated in an inferior fashion. For instance, there were the Louis Gossett Jr. character. He was a school guy. He went to school with Benitha, and he wore the preppy outfits. He wore the suits, and he wore the white shoes. In fact, white shoes and like not the old school nylon socks. In fact, Walter made reference to his shoes. He says, "What's with you college cats and always wearing them fruity white shoes?" I was kind of like, wow, that's a general statement about men that wear white shoes. But I guess that he was just coming for him because he felt that the character played by Louis Gossett Jr., his name was George Murchison. George Murchison was a bit of a snob, and Walter sensed that he was a bit of a snob, but then it made Walter feel like he needed to defend himself for his choices, which he really didn't have to do. But again, when you're trying to find your way as the patriarch of a situation, you have to work through those feelings and emotions, and Walter was still very much working through those feelings. I said very much twice. So I'm sorry, George was one of Benitha's courters, if you will. He was trying to date Benitha. Then as Walter is trying to negotiate through his growth, and the mother decides to give him $3,500 for him to go to open his business, instead of him going to the bank and opening the account for Benitha, he took all of the money, the entire $6,500, and gave it to who was supposed to be his business partner to go and get the liquor license. And then, of course, it turned out to be some sort of sham, and one of the guys ran off with everybody's money. Now Walter has nothing to show for it. The only thing that they have to show for it is $3,500 that Mrs. Younger put down as a down payment on the house for her family. Uh, that in turn just tore Walter Lee's spirit down to the ground. He felt worthless. He felt like he destroyed his family. He felt he was devastated beyond conversation, and it was like that for quite some time. Instead of him going to work, he would go to a bar and drink. Instead of dealing with the issues, he would just recoil and disappear. And the only reason Ruth found out about it is because she got a phone call from the person that Walter Lee used to drive for. Walter Lee was a limousine driver. He told Ruth, or his wife told Ruth, if he doesn't show up, he's going to have to get replaced because uh, the woman's husband had to take a cab to work for 3 days in a row. So that's when the mother, Mrs. Younger, discovered that Walter Lee had been going to a bar and getting drunk for the past 3 days. So ultimately, that was when Lena gave Walter Lee the money to open up the bar. That $6,500, and that's what really got him up in spirits. And then when the money got stolen, he just fell apart. So as this conversation is going on, Beneatha is having a conversation with her new quarter, a man named Joseph Asagi, who is from Africa, played by Ivan Dixon. Ivan Dixon, I've mentioned Ivan Dixon before. Previously, Ivan Dixon was the director of The Spook That Sat by the Door. Shooting that out there. So Ivan Dixon, or Joseph, is trying to encourage Beneatha to come back to Africa with him and become a doctor in Africa. Trying to pull her away from her family, not in a bad way, but he understands that her family is going through a hard time, and this is his mind that he wants to help her. That conversation goes neither here nor there. But what winds up happening is a gentleman, when they go and see the house, apparently, the house that they go to live in is in an area where they practice what's called redlining. Now, it's redlining is a practice that still goes on today, but they don't speak to it that way. So in Claiborne Heights, after they bought the house in Claiborne Heights, $3,500 was a down payment on the house. The welcoming committee, so to speak, came to see them at their other house. Character actor, I can't remember his name, but he showed up to the house to be the welcoming committee to tell them what the neighborhood is going to expect of them as a black family. The standards that they have. He kind of chicken pecked around the whole conversation, but he eventually got to it by saying, well, normally, people, he kept using the term you people. You people, we would think that you people would want to live around your own kind. That's when they understood what was going on. I use the term redlining. Redlining is a practice of where they keep certain people, mostly people of color, out of certain communities. They don't offer them financing. They don't offer them insurance in some cases. They don't offer them anything. And it's just to keep them out of certain neighborhoods. And this is community that creates that conversation. It's a horrible. I mean, I couldn't imagine a world where that is acceptable, but it happens all the time. More so in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, as we reach the 2000s, the 2020s, it's still a practice, but it's quiet. So they would not allow financing. I honestly don't know how Mrs. Younger wound up getting this house with that in mind. So they wouldn't have called it redlining back then. They would have called it more or less a lockout. You're not going to be able to buy a house in this community because we're not going to give you the money and we're not going to give you insurance. And if you do get anything, the community is going to chase you out. So what they wind up doing in the movie, this gentleman came to the welcoming committee, as I keep saying, came to their house to offer them money to sell them the house. He was going to give them a bunch of money. They paid this much, he was going to triple their money. And at first, Walter was going to accept it because of the fact that he lost the family's money in a scam. He lost the money. So he was going to accept it. But Mrs. Younger, Lena Younger, would not hear of it because she understood you did what you did, but now you have to stand on it. So we're not going to accept the fact that you are going to try to ruin everyone else's dreams because you made a mistake. And it was a mistake. So she ultimately told him, I need you to be the man that your father raised you to be. So when this gentleman came over to just give them the money, he went on his monologue. And what his monologue said was he is part of, in short, I'll make it short, he's part of 6 generations of people living in this country. 6 generations. And his father was a hardworking man. His mother cleaned houses for a living. His wife also cleaned houses for a living. But his sister is going to be a doctor, and they were very proud of her. And they were going to do whatever they had to do to make sure that she was a success. And he spoke the same way about his son, who he says is going to be anything he wants to be. That is why they decided to move into that house and to accept whatever it was going to be. He says, we're going to be good neighbors. We're going to do our very best to be whatever. We're not going to be a problem. And don't bother us. We won't bother you kind of conversation. And even in a redlining situation, that's something that just doesn't happen, meaning you won't even get past a certain point to be able to get the keys to the house. It's not going to be yours. But in this situation, they were actually able to get the house. And there have been many films and television shows where black families bought houses in white neighborhoods, and the entire, especially those little cul-de-sac cookie cutter type neighborhoods, and they were pretty much threatened, harassed, everything, until they were forced to move. There are other situations where you get what's called white flight. White flight is where it started off as a white community, and then eventually one black family moves in, and then another black family moves in, and then another black family moves in. Now you have 3 black families in this entire community, but the Caucasian families that mostly, I will say, the Caucasian families that live there, whoever's the head of that family feels that this is uncomfortable. I don't feel safe. I don't want to live here anymore. So what they do is they pack their house up and they leave. The Caucasian families, I'll say this again, the Caucasian families who maybe have been living in these houses for years, when black people, or people of color in general, but mostly this is a conversation about black people, they move into their neighborhood and they feel some kind of way, so they leave. The entire neighborhood picks up and leaves. An example of that is Compton, California. Compton, California used to be a white neighborhood. Compton, California was I believe it was Richard Nixon lived in Compton. All we know of Compton is straight out of Compton. My generation. That's all we know of Compton. Bloods and Crips. Compton. But Compton was a white neighborhood who was I don't want to say victim to, but I will say that experience was an experience of white flight. They picked up because black people started to move to the community and they left. And I'm sure progressive, because what I've heard about Compton in the earlier years, Compton, even when, like, as everybody was there, black people were there and some white people were there, it was a nice community still. It's just with the times, things started to shift and things happened in a bad way. But I don't know what to say about that. That's just how things work sometimes. That's absolutely how things work sometimes. So I'm not going to say we can't live here because this is primarily a white neighborhood and I'm worried about how the white people are going to respond, or how the Mexican people are going to respond, or Asian people are going to respond. It's absurd. But ignorance breeds fear, and fear breeds anger. Once we as a people in general just learn to stop being afraid of something we don't understand, which is generally how this works. When you don't understand something, you fear it. And when you fear something, you want to hurt it because you're more afraid of what it's going to do to you and your family than to want to leave it be. We as a people need to stop doing that. We as a race of human beings need to stop doing that. So let's go back. The family decides that they're going to move into this house. The mother couldn't be prouder. The wife is proud of her husband, watching her husband. The sister is ecstatic because she knows that her ambition and her dreams mean something to her brother, whereas he was always making fun of her. And that happens in families quite often. Encouragement, people fail to realize how far a word of encouragement can go with your siblings or with your even your friends. You take the time to say something positive about what somebody else is doing. You can change their life because it makes a person feel like I must be on the right track, because every time I look at this person, they're telling me how proud of me they are. They're telling me of how good of a job that I'm doing. We need to be more of that and less critical because your dream doesn't match my dream. As a people, that's something that we need to change. So, A Raisin in the Sun, for me, from what I saw, is a film that speaks to, I'll use the term a changing of the guard, if you will. They were fortunate enough to have their matriarch. But as the head of the household, as a head of a household, I understand what it's like to take that position as head of the household. As a child, when I was a child and my father passed away, I saw my mother struggle through trying to take control position of our household. She was confronted with challenges in every direction. It's something that happens, especially as she is a woman, is something that happened. Um, where I grew up, we didn't have racial tension, so to speak, because I grew up in a black neighborhood. I grew up in Harlem, New York. So we didn't have the racial tension within Harlem. But when you step outside of Harlem is where you started to see race conversations or situations of what is deemed as inequity, or where you actually felt threatened by someone outside of your community. And a lot of it was based in nothingness. It was based in a personal opinion about another group or another culture of people. To see it is, let me rephrase that, to experience it is amazing, but in a bad way. Because you can't believe that people will treat other people like that because of their race or their their color or whatever. It's very difficult to imagine that people would do that to each other. But let me say this. In the film, Walter Lee's integrity, Walter Lee's ambition, Walter Lee's attitude toward what he thought would be best for his family was based in pride. And what's the term? Pride before the fall. Your pride will get you into more trouble than anything else. Richard Pryor had a joke. He says, what do you say? Which would you prefer? I forget how the joke goes, but it's like, which would you prefer? No, your pride will heal a lot faster than a broken jaw. I think that's one of the best quotes I could ever hear or imagine about the word pride or the feeling of pride. Your pride will heal a lot faster than a broken jaw. Don't let your pride get you into a situation that you can't get your ass out of later. That's Walter Lee in the beginning portions of this movie. His pride was his motivation. He wanted to be able to say he did his job as the patriarch and man of the house. He did his job. He wasn't able to do his job at first. But everything has a beginning. They always speak to saying you can fall 9 times, but you get up 10 times. It's not how you fail, it's how you recover. Nothing beats a failure like a try. Nothing wrong with being ambitious. I would encourage anybody that has the thinking that they want to try something else, do something else, go for it. Go for it. But if your pride is going to cause you to make dumb mistakes just because of your pride, you need to rethink that. And in that sort of transition from son to patriarch, from child to man, although Walter Lee was very much an adult. Walter Lee was a married man with a child. They all lived in the same household, though. Even though Walter Lee was a married man, his father was still the boss of that household. So Walter Lee was more of a in line for the crown, if you will, but was not ready to take it. And when it happened, it was more thrust upon him than anything else. So he had to be able to figure out how to get his footing. This is what I'm going to do. As soon as that money comes in, he was dependent upon that money. He hadn't really had a plan outside of, I'm opening up a liquor store with the money that comes from someplace else, without thinking about what his family wanted. Later, for his family's ambition, you'll be happy as long as you got food and a place to rest your head, lights. That's going to make you happy. That's not what they were looking for. They wanted to just have someplace nice to live. The money was coming in. They could buy a house. Everybody's going to be happy. That's what they were trying to do. Walter Lee had a different plan. Wasn't necessarily a plan that was going to destroy the family, but it was a very selfish agenda. And again, when you're going through that transition, you're just looking for the best way to win, to make sure that what you're doing it as good as your father. Big shoes to fill. That's always a problem when you're trying to become the head of anything. You're trying to fill those shoes, and that's always very difficult to do and very daunting. So this is what I got from the movie A Raisin in the Sun. Being ready to be in charge of something and not, or feeling, or being appointed to take charge of something and not being ready for it at all. Experiencing things like a hate, especially in that era, an obvious hate or disdain for people, and still trying to live your life as happily as you can. That's what I think about. Humbling yourself to scrubbing someone's floors who does not appreciate you. In fact, they despise you. But you still need to feed your family. Humbling yourself. That's what I think of. That's a social issue. And it's a social issue that we as a people need to work on. A social issue that blacks, whites, the classist conversation of blacks and whites we subscribe to. That needs to break up. But Europeans, Africans, Asians, uh, other races, other cultures of people, we are all people. I heard something very profound the other day. If we present a red cup, a blue cup, a yellow cup, a white cup, a brown cup, fill them all with water, put lids on them, what color is the water? And then the person was asked, what color was the water? He says, it's still all water. He says, exactly. And people are the same way. This is how this works. This is how the universe works. People are all people. Your elitist classism is what creates issue in most cases. Your entitlement is what creates issues in most cases. Your feeling of ineptness or inferiority creates this thing in most cases. We need to shake that. How many centuries of life do we need to live before we get to understand we're all the same? Some of us have more than others, but at the end of the day, we're all the same. So movies like Raisin in the Sun speak not only to I wouldn't call it conflict, transition in the household. It speaks to social inequity. It speaks to racial inequity. It speaks to access. It speaks to feelings of ineptness just based on your experiences and how you are made to humble yourself in order to feed your family. Having to humble yourself in order to feed your family morally has to be probably one of the most degrading things in life. We today, who work today in the workforces that we work in today, however we feed our families, have to be incredibly grateful, because nowadays people can get in trouble for saying reckless stuff, for being racially having racial conversations or sexist conversations or anything like that. You get in trouble now. But back then, you couldn't even say anything. You couldn't even say anything. Now, different world. So we should feel lucky. Not lucky. I won't say lucky because I don't think that's a fair word. We should feel grateful that it's not like that nowadays. I mean, people have killed people behind people's mouth and saying things about, there was a line in a movie, he says, my father almost killed a man for calling him some kind of name. And I understand. Nobody deserves to be disrespected based on what you think about them. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how you feel about black people. White people feel about black people. Black people feel about white people. All of these things, it doesn't matter. None of that matters, because we're all different in personality and in character, but we're all the same as human beings. These are the things. This is the way you should live. This is the way you should think. Don't be so fast to shame somebody because of what your opinion of them is. Get to know who they are before you do that. People will show you who they are. And when they show you who they are, the best thing to do is to believe them. People can talk all day, but eventually their actions show you who they are. So take that. Take that, take that, take that. Floyd House Flicks. This has been Blacks in Cinema Sunday. We'll be back next Sunday to do this again. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for helping me to celebrate and enjoy A Raisin in the Sun. It's been a while since I watched this movie, and I truly appreciate it for what it is. In fact, this movie, in 2005, this movie was accepted by, put in by the Library of Congress. Is put into the U.S. National Film Registry as just a work of classic art. A great movie. It's a great film. If you haven't seen it before, go see it. Or not go see it, but pick it up, rent it on Amazon, pick it. It's probably on any of these streaming platforms. More than likely, it's on something. So it might even be on YouTube. So shouldn't be on YouTube. Take that down off YouTube. But if it is, you can dislike it, but you can watch it at the same time. So thank you for joining me for Blacks in Cinema Sundays. I'll be putting something up next week. I don't know what it is. We're gonna watch it together. I really do think I want to do like some sort of watch parties or some sort of gathering we can sit and I don't like the idea of the headphones. When I see people doing it, no disrespect. When I see people doing it and they got the headphones on and they just watching and everybody, just I don't know how I feel about that. So something I want to figure out something, and I invite any of you to come in and we can have a dialogue. We can have a real conversation about it. I'm always down for a real conversation about anything. It doesn't have to agree with what I say. But all I need you to do is come from a place of respect and come from a place of information. That's important. Later for your opinion, because we all have opinions, a little information, a little fact, a little something based in something that's actually real outside of the way that you feel about stuff. Because quite often our feelings can get us into trouble. Real talk. Floyd House Flicks. I am considering doing the physical media commutes reloaded. I've gotten quite a few. I've gotten quite a few messages regarding the physical media commute and a few ideas in regard to filming the physical media commute. I've strongly been thinking about it because I actually miss doing it. So we'll see. Don't be surprised if you don't see an email, rather not an email, you don't see an IG post of the physical media commute number 51, because that is the next one after all. Unless we do it like physical media commute season 2. Ooh, maybe I'll do 50. Another 50. We'll see. But again, thanks for riding with me in the physical media thank you for watching with me or sitting with me to chat about Raisin in the Sun on this Blacks in Cinema Sunday. I hope to see you all again next Sunday. You know how it is. I haven't picked the film yet, but when I do, you'll be the first to know. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Sharing is caring. Help a brother out. I want a plaque. I want to be on YouTubes and get a plaque. Who don't want that? All right, y'all. Salute. One love. Respect each other. Love each other. It goes a lot further. All right. One.